to when Barry Pollack is essentially someone who becomes the target of a modern day McCarthyist question of, is your client connected to the Russians? Can you tell us about the relationship that Julian Assange has with the Russian government? I kid you not.
On RT, formerly Russia Today, he published materials that were hacked by the Russian government from the DNC. He advised Edward Snowden to go to Russia, and according to Foreign Policy, he declined to publish a trove of documents that were hacked, that were from the Russian government, showing wrongdoing that other places ultimately published, which revealed new information. So can you explain what is Assange's relationship with Russia?
Assange has zero relationship with Russia. That is part of, there's a bit of a misinformation campaign, and we've heard some of it tonight. It was not a Russian conspiracy that got a journalist from The Guardian to inadvertently publish a password. The Russians had nothing to do with the Bradley Manning leaks, which is the subject of the Assange prosecution. You would make an excellent lawyer because you've already learned the trick that if you don't like the facts of your case, you talk about the facts of some other case. Assange isn't the one who made the decision to leak this material and made the decision that the public ought to know that the US government was lying about civilian casualties, that it had murdered unarmed Reuters staff members. It was Bradley Manning whose conscience made the decision to leak this material.
So people take that all in. He's just very directly dealt with the question. He said, no, there is no relationship between my client and the Russian government. And also, let me tell you about the thing that Holden was talking about with the password and David Lee, and how that could not be a part of some Russian conspiracy. And so he deals with it. He very directly deals with it. So now let's continue.
In terms of the hacking versus the espionage.
Well, I'm sorry, but I asked about his relationship with Russia.
And I answered that. He has none.
Okay. Well, then I want to move on to whether or not, Holden, you think that WikiLeaks should register as a foreign agent, as we saw RT had to a couple of years ago.
That wasn't a question we talked about. No,
that wasn't a question we talked about beforehand. That wasn't a question we talked about beforehand. I want to make an observation here. This is the second time she interrupts a panelist during this panel when they're speaking. Both times the panelist is Barry Pollack. Only one questioner during the question and answers period gets interrupted while asking a question. It was me. I was asked if I in fact had a question, and I've moderated panels, and I hate people who speechify instead of asking questions. So I'm slightly sympathetic to her there, but she clearly is hostile to Barry. She's clearly hostile to Assange's case, and she is clearly giving the game up here, and she refuses to accept that Assange has no relationship with Russia. And she has this follow-up with, should he have to register it under FARA like RT? Was she expecting Barry to describe a relationship with Russia? I'm like, what the fuck are we watching here?
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, was she thinking that she was just going to ask this question and, oh my gosh, I just got this amazing scoop here that Julian Assange is actually a Russian plant, and his U.S. attorney just confessed to it in the middle of this panel at the National Press Club. My career is made. Oh my, look at me.
Newsy wins the Pulitzer. Pulitzer for Paul's Newsy.
And the way that she says, well, I asked you about Russia, and he goes, and I answered it. And she's but, and then she insists, she can't believe that she didn't get anywhere. And then she pushes on to ask the next question to Holden, which is to directly ask if Julian Assange should register as a Russian agent or some shit. But obviously if he's not got any relationship, like his U.S. attorney just told you, then the question, you have to throw it out. It's a garbage question.
If you listen to sort of her vocal and tones and like under her breath, like she does not accept that he would even say he has no relationship with Russia, right? Like he should be ashamed of himself for not confessing his client is an agent of the Russian government. Also, why would Julian Assange have to register under FARA? As Holden Triplett said before, he's not a U.S. citizen. He does not operate in the U.S., right? Like FARA does not apply to Australians in Iceland, right? We don't like go to Iceland or like, aha, you doing things over here in Iceland, you're a foreign agent.
That's true. He would have to be on U.S. soil to register under
US,
FARA.
yes, it's a completely ignorant question. But like, let's hear what Holden has to say.
I'm a lawyer, by the way. I've just been in recovery from the
respond.
law profession for a few years here. But should he register? It's a really good question. But
No,
it's not.
I think we can talk about the intricacies of the case and what the government has decided to prosecute, whether it's the best case or not. What does it mean ultimately? But I think if, in the end, I think we actually had to think a little.
Plant that.
No.
Cell phone went off in the audience. Very annoying.
But I think we have to think about what is the government's motivation here? What is the government thinking about, and what are they concerned about, right? And so we have I think there's a different Assange in the early 2000s or even 2010 versus Assange in 2016 or even Assange today. There's a distinct evolution of patterns of activity and interactions with certain types of agencies. So whether he has any relationship, which, as I understand, that can be defined in all sorts of different ways with the Russian government, he had substantial interaction with the GRU, which is the military intelligence unit within the government there. Substantial coordination with them on the releasing of information. Again, I think we have to think about what is the value to the U.S. To the population of releasing information about one side of a political campaign, but not the other. And clearly stating a position, if you read deep into the Mueller report, stating a position on who he wanted to win in the U.S. election, which clearly swayed some of his desires to put out some information to hurt a particular side. Now, are these the activities of a journalist? Are these the activities of a publisher who's concerned about getting information into the public space to ensure that the American public is informed? Or is this someone who wants to sway public opinion in a particular way that has an agenda?
Yes.
So one more thing, I just want everyone to kind of sit back and have a thought experiment.
Okay.
If a Russian intelligence agency wanted to...
Wait, hold on. I'll get to his thought experiment.
Thought experiment. I'm gonna have an aneurysm with. I'll have to call 911.
I'll get to the thought experiment, but first we have to deal with this. So, okay, if you publish information that's just on one side, then that's like not allowed. That's not how journalism works. That's just not how journalism works. I don't have to. If I get a cache of documents on the Democratic Party, I don't have to sit here and go, well, where's the ones on the Republicans? Because if I don't get ones on the Republicans, I can't put this out in an election year. I might get accused of swaying an election. That's not how journalism works.
I mean, we can debate about what is good journalism ethics or what a journalist should or should not do. But as Gabe pointed out elsewhere in the panel, I mean, the First Amendment, the government doesn't define who or what is a journalist. This idea that if you have an agenda or you want to sway public opinion, you're not a journalist. I mean, that could be someone's idealized perception of journalism. I hate to break it to you, but many publishers of publications do wish to sway public opinion.
What was CNN during the Trump administration when they were trying to communicate how democracy was crumbling?
Even tabling that, like the National Review clearly wants to sway public opinion. The Nation wants to sway public opinion, right? One of the things the First Amendment gives us the right to do is to, in fact, the reason we have a First Amendment, freedom of the press, because at the time of the drafting of the First Amendment, the news media was much more openly partisan. Like all of newspapers were associated with a political party, was because you have a right to write a newspaper, write articles, share your opinion, and disseminate information in order to disseminate a public in order to sway public opinion. And this is a constant thing. We saw this during the J20 Trump protester trial, where she's like, oh, he can't be a journalist. He sympathizes with the protesters. Or when Amy Goodman was indicted over Standing Rock stuff, and the prosecutor's like, oh, she's not a journalist. She's sympathetic to the Standing Rock, right? Like advocacy journalism is a thing. Whether or not you think journalists should like submit blank ballots at election time and do right, you can have those views, but that has nothing to do with the First Amendment freedom of the press, which very clearly protects the right to engage in political advocacy and the right to engage in journalism with the intent to advocate for things. So this entire framing is just, I mean, he says I'm a lawyer, but I'm in recovery. I mean, it's completely ignorant of the First Amendment and what it protects, but very common, unfortunately, tactic.
Yeah. All right. So let's get to this thought experiment.
Oh, God.
And try not to completely lose it. And I hope that you're still with us after we're finished.
So one more thing, I just want everyone to kind of sit back and have a thought experiment. If a Russian intelligence agency wanted to create a publisher that they could manipulate and use, what would that look like? And would that same publishing agency, that publishing unit, would that get First Amendment protection? Could the GRU claim First Amendment protection because they've published information that's in the interest of the American public? Should they get First Amendment protection? Are there any limits to First Amendment protection? So the answer is, of course, there are a lot of limits that have been put out there. And so I think we have to really think about what are we dealing with here, right? And there's a clear evolution of this organization from early on in 2000 to what we're dealing with now. And whether the relationship is there between the Russian government and Assange, there's clearly interaction and there's clearly coordination. We can call it whatever we want.
Interesting. Well, maybe there will be questions from the audience about this, but moving forward.
It's not interesting. It's bullshit.
I mean, I did the thought experiment, Kevin. I thought up a publisher that the GRU would like, and I did not think of WikiLeaks. So I guess I've nullified his thought experiment. I mean, I don't know where you even start with this, right? The implication of this thought experiment is the publisher I am thinking of is WikiLeaks. As I said, I sat there doing the thought experiment. I didn't think of WikiLeaks. Sorry, Holden. And then this GRU, does the GRU have First Amendment protections? I mean, what he's doing is really insidious here because he continuously states, I don't actually know anything. But what if? And then he sort of engages in this insinuation, right? If you do this thought experiment, you'll think of WikiLeaks. Therefore, WikiLeaks is a product of the GRU. That's not evidence at all. That's just, these are my feelings. And therefore, they're the GRU. Oh, so you're saying the GRU has First Amendment protections? It's completely, nonsensical. I mean, the GRU does not have First Amendment protections. I mean, that's not what we're debating, but they've offered no proof that WikiLeaks is a Russian intelligence operative. They make no acknowledgement of the fact that he worked with the New York Times, Le Monde, El País, etc., and released this information. Are they also part of this Russian plot, or are they just unwitting agents? I know the answer or I can guess the answer because I talked to this man after the panel and got some very disturbing insights into his
Yeah, we'll get to that in just a minute.
Thoughts on the civil rights movement.
But so so I don't believe that he knows anything about the 2010, 2011 era of WikiLeaks and what is at issue in the case. And even though Barry Pollack laid out some facts, I don't think his brain was capable of retaining it. In fact, maybe that's why he looks like he's under a lot of stress as he is trying to deliver his answers, because he's just met with all this information and it's overwhelming him. and he wants to stay on the wave tops and just surf the waves and not get into the specifics with he's got this like wavy surfer hair. And so, but I do think that Holden knows about Robert Mueller and Robert Mueller's investigation and the allegations against WikiLeaks and what was said about WikiLeaks and Donald Trump, what was said about Donald Trump and Russia, and all the things that were said about Russia trying to sway the 2016 election. So we certainly would know that nobody, as far as I can tell, has ever said that Julian Assange met with the GRU in order to get these documents and publish them on the internet. That he talks about these relationships, he talks about these interactions. There are no specifics. He doesn't talk about any evidence that any of this shit ever happened. And yet, like, he goes on and on. But the theory that was always put forward, which I don't think that's been proven, but the theory that was put forward is that they unwittingly published documents from Russian intelligence. And then, having been found out that those documents came from Russian intelligence, they refused to concede and admit that it came from state actors in Russia. That, to me, is what the Mueller investigation was trying to confirm, and what people who attacked WikiLeaks during 2016 election and their conduct during the 2016 election, that's what they were talking about. Now, he's doing something else. He's, as you're saying, much more insidious, because he's actually saying that Assange has aligned himself with the GRU and is working with Russian intelligence.